The afternoon sun beat down on the desolate outskirts of Henderson, Nevada, baking the cracked asphalt until the horizon distorted into shimmering waves of heat. A high-profile convoy of polished black sport utility vehicles sped down the empty desert highway, flanked by security motorcycles and camera trucks kicking up plumes of white dust. Isolated in the center of this aggressive motorcade, looking like a stealth fighter jet dropped onto a highway, a matte black hypercar captured the intense sunlight and absorbed it completely. This was the Apex Stratos, an experimental hybrid prototype valued at over $12 million. It was scheduled to be unveiled on a grand stage in exactly 45 minutes to an international circle of tech investors who had flown in from London and Tokyo. Inside the quiet, air-conditioned cabin of the lead support SUV, Helena Sterling reviewed her financial projections on a sleek, borderless tablet. Helena was 28, brilliant and fiercely elegant in a tailored ivory pantsuit and a silk emerald blouse. Her dark hair was gathered into a sharp, flawless low bun, and her green eyes moved with cold precision across the scrolling data. 2 years ago, when her grandfather passed away, Helena inherited the mantle of Chief Executive Officer at Sterling Dynamics. Ever since that day, every board member, every rival executive, and every media outlet had whispered that she was nothing more than a legacy placeholder who lacked the grit to run a global empire. This afternoon was supposed to be her definitive answer to those whispers. The Apex Stratos was her vision, her gamble, her proof to the board that she belonged at the absolute summit of the industry. Suddenly, a strange vibration rippled through the pavement. The hypercar just ahead of her convoy shuddered violently, its low-slung body tilting as if a sudden weight had dropped onto the chassis. Inside the Stratos, the digital dashboard instantly flared with an aggressive cascade of crimson warnings. The sleek LED headlights blinked erratically, the climate control went entirely dead, and the roaring experimental engine fell completely silent. The hypercar coasted helplessly along the shoulder of the highway, throwing up a cloud of gravel before grinding to a complete halt in the dirt. The entire convoy slammed on their brakes in a chaotic, dust-filled wave. Doors flew open. Urgent, panicked voices filled the dry desert air. Helena stepped out of her SUV directly into the oppressive 105-degree heat, her tablet held tightly against her ribcage. She could feel her heart hammering a heavy, desperate rhythm against her chest as she marched toward the disabled prototype. A young lead technician named Barrett Hayes rushed forward from a support van, balancing a rugged diagnostic laptop against his stomach while sweat poured down his temples. He plugged a heavy interface cable into the hidden port under the front wing of the Stratos, staring in mounting horror as hundreds of lines of red error logs cascaded down his screen. High-voltage insulation breach. Core thermal array communication failure. Inverter array lockout. The machine was systematically shutting itself down, bricking its own advanced computers. Barrett looked up at Helena, attempting to offer a reassuring professional smile, but his expression collapsed into pure panic before he could speak a word. An assistant ran back from the transport truck with devastating news. The company's heavy-duty enclosed vehicle recovery transport was stuck in a massive multi-car pileup 30 miles back on the interstate. The estimated time of arrival was nearly 2 hours. The global live-streamed launch event was in 45 minutes. The math was brutally simple, and it was entirely catastrophic. The only structure visible for miles was a low, sun-bleached concrete building standing just off the next exit ramp. It was a modest, independent garage with a faded, hand-painted sign that read, Vance Mechanical Systems. The building looked like a relic of a bygone era. The metal roll-up doors were dented and scratched. A pair of rusted iron barrels stood near the chain-link fence, and an old, battered pickup truck sat in the corner, covered in a thick layer of desert dust. The contrast was almost absurd. The multi-million-dollar hypercar was slowly pushed onto the cracked concrete lot of this forgotten workshop like a priceless diamond placed on a dusty wooden table. Garrett Vance stepped out from beneath the dark shadow of the half-raised garage door, wiping grease from his calloused fingers with a clean, white rag. He was 29 years old. Tall, broad-shouldered, and possessed a quiet, stoic presence. His dark hair was cut short, his jawline was rugged, and his calm brown eyes held the deep, weary strength of a man who had spent years focusing entirely on protecting someone else. He wore a simple gray cotton t-shirt, dark work trousers, and a pair of worn, oil-stained boots. Behind the small, scratched glass window of the garage office sat his 7-year-old daughter, Maeve. Her soft brown hair fell in long, loose curls over her shoulders as she clutched a worn, patched teddy bear named Barnaby tightly in her lap. Barnaby was the last thing her mother had given her before passing away in a hospital room 4 years ago. Helena marched into the dusty lot, her eyes sweeping over the peeling paint on the walls, the homemade wooden tool racks, the old ceiling fan spinning slowly inside, and the layer of desert dust on the windowsills. Her lips compressed into a thin, bitter line of pure disgust. "You call this a repair shop?" Helena said, her sharp voice cutting through the heavy heat like a scalpel. "This looks like a junkyard where people abandon vehicles to rot, not a place where anyone should be permitted to touch an elite piece of global technology." Inside the glass office, Maeve ducked her head, her small fingers tightening around the stitched ears of her teddy bear until her tiny knuckles turned entirely white. Garrett glanced at his daughter through the glass for a brief, fiercely protective second. Then he looked back at Helena. His expression did not change. He did not raise his voice, he did not look insulted, and he did not flinch. He simply gestured toward the silent, dark dashboard of the multi-million-dollar vehicle. "Do you want me to look at it?" Garrett asked calmly. "Or would you prefer to wait out here in the desert for your transport truck?" Helena looked him up and down, noting the grease stain on his shirt, the scuffs on his boots, and the little girl watching fearfully from the office window. She lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with cold arrogance. "I am not letting a backyard mechanic in a rundown shack lay his hands on a $12 million asset," Helena snapped. Garrett did not argue. He simply stood there, watching her with a quiet, unsettling intelligence. At that exact moment, the dashboard inside the Apex Stratos clicked faintly, flashing a final, weak red light before going entirely dark. Garrett spoke softly, his voice steady and low. "Your car isn't broken," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "It's just terrified of the wrong signal. You can waste your time waiting, but you're running out of it." The digital clock on the dashboard of the support vehicle flicked relentlessly down to 40 minutes before the global broadcast. The desert heat seemed to thicken, trapping the desperate team in a pressure cooker of corporate stakes and mechanical silence. Helena Sterling stood near the edge of the asphalt, her phone pressed so hard against her ear that her knuckles were white. Her poised, untouchable corporate armor was beginning to show its first microscopic fractures. On the other end of the line, a harsh, demanding voice boomed loud enough to bleed into the quiet desert air. It was Sterling Dynamics' most ruthless board member, Marcus Vance. No, wait. I must ensure absolutely no shared surnames. Let's name him Marcus Sterling. No, he can't share a last name with Helena either if they are unrelated board members, or if he is an uncle, it's fine. But let's make him unrelated. Let's name him Douglas Vance. No, Vance is Garrett's last name. Let's name him Preston Caldwell. Helena, the satellite feed to Tokyo is already live. Preston Caldwell barked, his voice dripping with aristocratic impatience. The venture capitalists are sitting in the front row. If that vehicle is not on the platform when the countdown hits 0, a motion will be introduced to review your leadership before the market opens tomorrow morning. Do you understand me? Helena closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling in a sharp, shallow breath. She looked at the gorgeous, dead hypercar, then at her frantic technical crew, and finally at the small, unassuming garage. Garrett Vance had not always been a small-town mechanic working out of a sun-bleached desert shop. 6 years ago, his hands were considered some of the most valuable assets in the experimental automotive world. He had been the lead low-voltage integration specialist for the black-budget defense programs at Omnitech Aerospace in Seattle. He understood the hidden language of currents, the delicate frequencies of microchips, and how machines reacted under extreme stress. He had possessed an elite future, a massive salary, and a beautiful home. Then, reality shattered. His wife, Clara, was diagnosed with a rapid, aggressive neurological condition. Within 8 months, she was gone. Garrett had stood in a sterile hospital corridor holding a 3-year-old Maeve against his chest, listening to the hollow hum of the medical monitors. In that devastating moment of clarity, he realized that high-stakes corporate success meant absolutely nothing if his daughter grew up being raised by private nannies and empty schedules. He walked away from the wealth. He bought this quiet, forgotten garage in Henderson, Nevada, hiding himself and his genius from the world to ensure that every single day when Maeve looked up, her father was there. Inside the air-conditioned refuge of the garage office, Maeve watched the elegant, distressed woman through the glass. She saw the way Helena's hands trembled slightly as she hung up the phone. Children possess an innate radar for genuine distress, and Maeve couldn't bear to see someone looking so entirely lost. Clutching her patched teddy bear, Barnaby, tightly against her chest, Maeve pushed the office door open. The small bell above the frame chimed softly. She walked across the cracked concrete, holding out a chilled, sweating bottle of water toward Helena. "You look like your belly hurts from worrying," Maeve said, her voice soft, pure, and completely devoid of malice. "My daddy always says a cold drink helps you find your breath. You don't have to be scared. You don't have to be scared. My daddy can fix anything that's broken." Helena blinked down at the little girl, momentarily caught off guard by the unearned kindness. For a split second, the cold, impenetrable CEO vanished, replaced by a vulnerable woman drowning in pressure. But before Helena could speak, her senior corporate director, Julian Thorne, stepped forward. Julian was 35, dressed in an immaculate three-piece charcoal suit that looked entirely ridiculous in the desert heat, and his patience had completely evaporated. He snatched the water bottle from Maeve's hand and tossed it carelessly onto a nearby oil drum. "Step back, kid," Julian snapped, his voice sharp and condescending. "We are trying to save a multi-billion-dollar corporate launch, not playing games in a sandbox. Go back inside and let the real professionals work." The air in the lot instantly turned freezing cold, despite the 105-degree sun. Garrett Vance hadn't reacted when Helena insulted his shop. He hadn't reacted when the convoy tore up his gravel. But the moment Julian's sharp tone caused Maeve to take a frightened step backward, Garrett dropped his grease rag. He moved with an efficient, terrifyingly quiet, athletic grace. Before Julian could even turn around, Garrett was standing directly between the corporate director and the little girl. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't shout. He simply stood at his full height, his broad shoulders completely blocking Julian's view of Maeve, and looked down at the smaller man with eyes that had seen things far more dangerous than a corporate executive. His posture was perfectly steady. His breathing was slow and measured. The quiet aura of absolute masculinity filled the space, completely paralyzing Julian's arrogance. "You speak to my daughter like that again," Garrett said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly vibration that vibrated through the concrete, "and you'll find out exactly how fast a backyard mechanic can remove you from my property." Julian swallowed hard, his face turning an uncomfortably pale shade of pink as he took a submissive step back. Garrett ignored him completely, kneeling down in front of Maeve. His entire demeanor shifted from an imposing wall of stone to a warm, gentle safe haven. He softly straightened the collar of her shirt and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Go on back inside with Barnaby, sweetheart," Garrett murmured, his voice wrapped in absolute tenderness. "Daddy's got everything under control out here." Maeve nodded quickly, her eyes shining with absolute trust. "I know, Daddy," she whispered, before running back to the safety of the office. Helena watched the entire display in total silence. She had spent her entire life surrounded by powerful men, billionaires, politicians, board members, men who used money and shouting to command a room. But she had never seen a man command an environment through sheer, quiet presence alone. At the front of the hypercar, Barrett Hayes suddenly let out a defeated groan. The diagnostic screen flashed a final, catastrophic warning error code, System Identity Termination Protocol active. The screen went completely black. "Ma'am," Barrett said, his voice shaking as he looked at Helena. "The internal security firewall just locked out the main logic assembly. The Apex Stratos is completely dead. We're officially out of time." The silence that followed Barrett Hayes' announcement was heavier than the desert heat. 33 minutes remained on the digital countdown, and the multi-million-dollar future of Sterling Dynamics was nothing more than a gorgeous, unresponsive block of carbon fiber and dead circuitry. Julian Thorne was hyperventilating, his expensive tie pulled loose as he paced the cracked concrete, screaming into his phone at a logistics coordinator who was miles away. Helena Sterling stood, completely frozen. The wind picked up, carrying a fine grit of desert sand that stung her face. But she didn't even blink. Every corporate knife she had spent the last 2 years dodging was now pressed firmly against her throat. If the Apex Stratos did not roll onto the stage at the Aegis Exhibition Center, Preston Caldwell and the rest of the board would strip her of her grandfather's legacy before the sun went down. She felt an icy wave of panic clawing its way up her chest, a rare and terrifying loss of control that threatened to break her carefully constructed public mask. She looked at her team of elite, university-educated engineers. They were staring at their blank laptop screens with hollow, defeated expressions. Then, her eyes drifted to Garrett Vance. He was standing by his workbench, completely unbothered by the corporate apocalypse unfolding in his yard. He was carefully pouring clean oil into an old glass measuring jar, his movements slow, rhythmic, and grounded. There was no panic in him. There was no desperation. He looked like a man who knew exactly who he was, completely independent of the wealth or opinions of the people standing outside his door. Helena swallowed her pride. It felt like ash in her throat, but she had no other choice. She walked across the cracked concrete, her high heels clicking sharply until she stopped just 2 feet away from him. "Please," Helena said. Her voice was stripped of its previous ice, leaving it raw, quiet, and noticeably trembling. "My entire life is in the back of that transport. If that car doesn't start, I lose everything. Can you fix it?" Garrett didn't look up immediately. He finished pouring the oil, set the container down with a soft metallic thud, and wiped his hands on his rag. When he finally met her gaze, his calm brown eyes searched her face. He didn't look for a billionaire CEO. He looked for the human being underneath the ivory suit. He saw the genuine, desperate vulnerability in her eyes, the rare fracture in her armor that money couldn't patch. 10 minutes, Garrett said simply. "Keep your director quiet and give me 10 minutes. Julian Thorne overrode them instantly, marching over with his phone raised like a weapon. "This is madness. Helena, you cannot let this grease monkey touch the internal logic arrays. If he shorts the primary lithium core, the entire chassis could ignite. He doesn't even have a digital diagnostic terminal. He's going to destroy the prototype." Garrett ignored Julian completely. He walked past the shouting executive as if he were nothing more than a gust of wind, approaching the silent hypercar with a heavy leather tool roll tucked under his arm. He didn't look at a laptop. Instead, he placed his bare palm flat against the rear quarter panel of the vehicle, right above the cooling vents. He closed his eyes, tilting his head slightly. To the elite engineering team, he looked like a lunatic casting a spell. But to anyone trained in the deep, forgotten arts of advanced machinery, he was doing something primitive and profound. He was listening to the thermal expansion of the metal. He was feeling the microscopic hum of the auxiliary cooling pumps that were trying and failing to cycle fluid through the block. He opened his tools and selected a simple, slender brass inspection probe and a mechanical stethoscope. He leaned deep into the rear engine bay, his broad shoulders blocking the sun. Barrett Hayes watched in breathless silence as Garrett's fingers moved across the proprietary wiring harnesses with an impossible, fluid familiarity. Garrett didn't hesitate. He didn't look at a manual. He knew exactly where the primary isolation relays lived, exactly how the low-voltage logic gates intersected with the high-voltage architecture. It was the unmistakable muscle memory of a man who had helped write the very rules these corporate engineers were trying to follow. Inside the glass office, Maeve pressed her small nose against the window pane, clutching Barnaby, the bear. She wasn't worried about the car, and she wasn't worried about the angry men in suits. She was just watching her dad. She knew that whenever his face went that still, and his hands moved that smoothly, the world was about to become safe again. Garrett straightened up, his face glistening with sweat. He looked at Helena, completely ignoring the frantic whispers of her staff. "Your elite detail crew spent 3 hours polishing this vehicle in a climate-controlled hangar this morning, didn't they?" Garrett asked, his voice steady. Helena blinked, caught off guard. "Yes. They used a specialized electrostatic microfiber system to ensure there wasn't a single speck of dust on the matte finish for the cameras." "Why?" "Because they didn't account for the Henderson Desert," Garrett said, pointing a grease-stained finger toward a tiny, concealed atmospheric pressure sensor nestled deep inside the front splitter. The electrostatic charge from their polishing cloths turned this entire front bumper into a giant magnet for fine, microscopic desert silica the moment you hit the highway. The dust didn't just coat the car, it completely choked the static pressure sensor. Barrett Hayes frowned, stepping forward. "Wait, if the static sensor is choked," the computer thinks. "The computer thinks the vehicle is experiencing an explosive decompression in the cooling vacuum lines," Garrett finished, his voice cutting through the air with absolute authority. To prevent a catastrophic thermal runaway, the safety firewall instantly triggered a hard identity termination protocol. It locked the car down because it thinks it's about to explode. The engine isn't broken, it's just paralyzed by a ghost in the sensor. Julian Thorne let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "A ghost in the sensor? You expect us to believe a $12 million machine was brought down by a little bit of dust? This is ridiculous. Helena, order the team to pull the car onto the flatbed. We are leaving." Garrett didn't argue. He reached into his tool roll and pulled out a small, highly pressurized canister of specialized electrical contact cleaner and a fine nylon pick. He leaned back over the front bumper, his movements precise and entirely unbothered by Julian's shouting. With a single, steady flick of his wrist, he cleared the microscopic blockage from the tiny sensor port, releasing a tiny hiss of trapped air. "Now," Garrett said, standing up and tossing the pick back into his roll. "Get in the driver's seat." Helena didn't look at Julian. She didn't look at her engineers. Driven by a sudden, undeniable instinct that this man possessed a safety her money could never buy, she walked to the hypercar, lifted the sleek butterfly door, and slid into the leather cockpit. The interior was dead. The digital screens were black. "Press and hold the primary ignition toggle," Garrett instructed from the open window, his calm face appearing beside her. "But do not release it when the lights flash. Hold it down for exactly 5 seconds to force a manual logic override." Helena's hand trembled. She reached out, her manicured finger pressing against the cold metal toggle switch. She held it down. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Suddenly, a violent, piercing alarm shrieked from the speakers. The entire digital dashboard flared into a blinding, chaotic strobing pattern of bright yellow and deep purple lights. A massive warning message flashed across the central screen. "Critical hardware override detected. Core damage imminent." Julian screamed from the lot. "He's frying the computer." "Helena, get out of the car!" Helena looked up through the windshield at Garrett. He didn't move an inch. He just looked at her through the glass, his eyes completely steady, holding her gaze with a quiet, unyielding strength that demanded her absolute trust. "Don't let go, Helena," Garrett said softly, his voice cutting right through the panic of the alarm. "Trust me." The countdown clock in her head hit 28 minutes. The alarm grew louder, a deafening mechanical scream that echoed off the concrete walls of the garage. And then, with a terrifying electrical pop, the entire vehicle went completely black and silent once more. For 3 agonizing seconds, the absolute stillness inside the cockpit felt like the bottom of an ocean. Helena Sterling sat with her finger pressed against the cold toggle switch, her eyes locked onto the black, lifeless display screen. The expensive ivory fabric of her suit jacket clung to her skin, damp with the cold sweat of a sudden, paralyzing realization. The multi-million-dollar project was dead. Her family legacy was gone. The Whispering board members had won, and she had allowed a man in a grease-stained t-shirt to deliver the final blow. Julian Thorne exploded into motion, his face contorted in a mixture of panicked rage and vindictive triumph. He stepped toward the open car door, violently pulling the polished metal frame away from Garrett Vance. "I told you," Julian screamed, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical register that echoed off the metal roof of the workshop. "I told you he would destroy it. You've just fried a $12 million sovereign-backed asset, you incompetent hillbilly. Security, grab him. Don't let him leave this property." 2 burly security personnel from the convoy stepped forward, their hands moving instinctively toward their waistbands, their expressions tense. Inside the glass office, the sudden shift in gravity was immediate. Maeve gasped, her small hands flying up to cover her mouth as she pressed herself flat against the wall, her wide, terrified eyes darting from the guards to her father. Barnaby the bear slipped from her fingers, landing silently on the linoleum floor. Garrett didn't shift his stance by an inch. He didn't look at the guards, and he didn't look at Julian. His gaze remained anchored entirely on Helena, who was still frozen behind the wheel, her hands trembling against the carbon fiber steering column. "Count to 3, Helena," Garrett said. His voice was entirely devoid of fear, operating at a frequency so calm, so profoundly steady, that it seemed to physically slow the frantic energy vibrating through the lot. The system had to discharge the residual capacitance from the corrupted sensor. "Don't look at him, look at the display." Julian lunged forward, reaching out a manicured hand to grab Helena's shoulder. "Helena, get out of that piece of junk right now before it catches fire. We are calling the federal authorities," and before Julian's fingers could make contact with her jacket, a deep, sub-audible hum resonated through the concrete beneath their feet. It wasn't a mechanical noise. It was a pure tectonic vibration that rattled the old oil drums against the chain-link fence. The dark dashboard screens didn't just blink. They ignited with a flawless, crystalline white glow. The aggressive red error codes were completely gone, replaced by a smooth, scrolling emerald diagnostic bar that read, "System logic integrated, core temperatures nominal." A split second later, the experimental hybrid power plant inside the Apex Stratos woke up. It didn't sound like a traditional engine. It was a massive, terrifyingly smooth surge of electrical and mechanical energy that sounded like a low-frequency thunderclap trapped inside a carbon fiber vault. The twin exhaust ports at the rear pulsed with a clean, invisible heat wave that blew the desert dust away from the car in a perfect circle. Barrett Hayes dropped his diagnostic laptop onto the dirt, his mouth hanging open in absolute unscientific shock. The system is fully synchronized, he whispered, his eyes darting across the glowing telemetry data now broadcasting back to his smartphone. The insulation breach is gone. The core thermal array is perfectly balanced. It's running cleaner than it did in the laboratory. Helena let out a long, shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked down at her hands, then up through the windshield at Garrett. The sheer, overwhelming relief that washed over her was so intense that her vision blurred for a fraction of a second. She had spent her entire career surrounded by experts who claimed they could solve any problem with a large enough budget and a team of consultants. Yet, this man had saved her entire universe with a canister of contact cleaner and 5 seconds of absolute, unyielding silence. Julian stared at the glowing dashboard, his face turning from a bright crimson to an ash gray. He swallowed hard, trying to adjust his posture, trying to pull his shredded authority back together around his shoulders. He cleared his throat, stepping past the security guards who had quickly retreated to their baseline positions. "Well," Julian muttered, adjusting his silk tie with trembling fingers as he forced a hollow, patronizing smile. "It seems the prototype's internal recovery protocol functioned exactly as our design team intended. Excellent work tracking the automated recovery, Barrett. Helena, we need to load the vehicle onto the support flatbed immediately. We have exactly 22 minutes to reach the exhibition hall." "The transport flatbed is still trapped in a 3-mile gridlock on the interstate, Julian," Barrett said quietly, not looking up from his phone. "The highway patrol just shut down all lanes. There is no truck coming." The sudden silence returned, sharper this time. 22 minutes. 30 miles of open desert roads and heavy secondary traffic stood between the garage and the Aegis Exhibition Center. Julian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the running hypercar. "Then we drive it," he declared, his voice rising with a desperate sudden authority. "I will drive it myself. I have the corporate performance clearance. Helena, get out of the vehicle. I'll pilot the asset to the venue and ensure the investors see a leadership team that handles crises with absolute confidence." He stepped toward the open butterfly door, his hand reaching for the leather handle, his eyes flashing with the sudden opportunity to claim the day's ultimate victory in front of the board. Garrett Vance stepped into his path. He didn't touch Julian, but his physical presence was an absolute, unyielding wall of muscle and resolve that brought the corporate director to an instant halt. "You aren't driving this car anywhere," Garrett said softly. Julian's arrogance flared back to life, fueled by the ticking clock. "Get out of my way, Vance. The car is working now. Your little roadside assistance job is over. We will send your shop a standard check for $100, but right now, you are interfering with a multi-billion-dollar corporate operation. Move." "The static pressure sensor is clean," Garrett explained, his voice entirely level, his eyes fixed on Julian with a cold, terrifying clarity. "But the secondary vacuum lines are still heavily pressurized from the thermal lockout. The moment you take this vehicle past 4,000 RPMs without a manual bleed sequence during acceleration, the computer will read the pressure spike as an engine fire and permanently brick the entire drivetrain. You won't make it to the main road before you turn this $12 million machine into a stationary paperweight." Julian's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked back at Barrett Hayes, silently begging for a contradiction. Barrett looked down at his screen, his fingers flying across the data logs, his face turning pale. He's right, Julian. The vacuum threshold is sitting at 98% capacity. The automated bleed valves are locked down by the security protocol. If someone stomps on the throttle without knowing the manual mechanical overrides, the car will kill itself permanently. Helena looked up from the driver's cockpit. The immense, powerful CEO of Sterling Dynamics looked completely helpless, trapped between a ticking clock and a machine she didn't know how to control. She looked at Julian, whose face was written with pure, cowardly panic, and then she looked at Garrett. The contrast was absolute. Money, corporate titles, and expensive suits had bought her an empire. But out here in the unforgiving dust of the desert, none of it could buy her safety or a way forward. Only the calm, steady strength of the man standing before her could do that. "Garrett," Helena said, her voice rising clear and resonant above the low rumble of the engine. She stepped out of the hypercar, her green eyes locked onto his. Drive it. Drive the car to the exhibition center. Sit in that seat, handle the valves, and get my grandfather's dream onto that stage. I will pay you whatever you want. Name your price. Luberfor. 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 Garrett looked at her for a long, quiet moment. He didn't look excited by the offer, nor did he look intimidated by the scale of the task. He simply turned his head and looked back toward the glass window of his office. Maeve was standing there, holding Barnaby the bear against her chest, her small face filled with a quiet, anxious wonder. "I don't leave my daughter alone," Garrett said simply. "Not for any amount of money." Helena Sterling did not hesitate. She looked at the digital clock on her wrist, then at the little girl standing inside the office window, and finally at the quiet determination in Garrett Vance's eyes. For the first time in her corporate career, Helena did not try to negotiate a lower price or look for a loophole. She recognized an immovable mountain when she stood before one. "She comes with us," Helena said, her voice clear and commanding, leaving absolutely no room for Julian Thorne to object. "She will ride in the center seat of my personal armored SUV. My chief of security will guard her with his life, and the cabin is fully bulletproof and climate-controlled. She will be exactly 40 feet behind you the entire way to the exhibition hall, and she will have the best seat in the auditorium when we arrive." Garrett looked at Helena for 3 long seconds, searching her eyes for any trace of corporate deceit. He saw only an earnest, desperate sincerity. He turned toward the office door, gesturing for Maeve to come out. The little girl walked out onto the concrete, holding Barnaby the bear tightly against her chest. "Maeve, sweetheart," Garrett said, kneeling down to her level once more. "This lady needs Daddy to drive her car to the big show. You're going to ride in the big, safe truck right behind me. You keep Barnaby safe, and I'll see you at the finish line. Do you trust me?" Maeve looked at her father, her small face completely relaxing the moment he spoke. "I trust you, Daddy. You're the fastest driver in the world." As Garrett stood up to prepare for the drive, he walked over to his old, battered steel toolbox. He reached into the very bottom drawer, moving aside old iron wrenches until his fingers found a small, brushed titanium data key hidden beneath a velvet cloth. It was a proprietary hardware token he hadn't touched in 6 years, an elite diagnostic bypass tool from his classified defense days at Omnitech Aerospace. Barrett Hayes happened to be standing right behind him, looking over his shoulder. The young engineer's eyes suddenly went wide as he caught sight of the laser-etched serial code on the side of the titanium key. The code began with the prefix Omega 9 Alpha. Barrett's breath hitched in his throat. He had spent years studying advanced defense engineering textbooks, and he knew exactly what that prefix meant. It was a clearance level granted to only 5 black-budget propulsion architects in the entire United States. The legendary, nameless engineer who had designed the suborbital stabilization systems for the military's next-generation stealth platforms had used that exact signature before vanishing from the industry completely. Barrett stared at Garrett's profile, his voice dropping to a terrified, reverent whisper. You're him. You're the architect of the..." "I'm a mechanic," Garrett interrupted softly, his brown eyes locking onto Barrett with a cold, silent authority that instantly froze the young technician's tongue. "And right now, we have a car to deliver." Before Barrett could process the shock, Garrett walked over to the running hypercar and slid effortlessly into the low-slung, carbon fiber driver's seat. Helena stepped forward, bypassing Julian entirely, and slid into the passenger seat beside him, pulling her safety harness tight across her ivory suit. Julian tried to reach for the door, but Helena hit the lock mechanism, sealing them inside the soundproof cockpit. Maeve was gently guided into the massive support SUV by Helena's security detail, her small hand waving Barnaby out the dark-tinted window. Garrett shifted the Apex Stratos into gear. The transmission engaged with a precise, metallic click, and with a gentle press of his boot against the throttle, the $12 million hypercar melted out of the gravel lot and onto the open desert highway. The chase convoy surged into position behind them, their sirens wailing as they cleared the secondary lanes. The countdown clock in the center console flashed 19 minutes. The digital speed readouts began to climb rapidly. 60 miles per hour, 80, 100. The desert scenery outside the windows transformed into a blurry streak of beige and rust. Inside the cockpit, the tension was suffocating. Helena gripped the leather armrest, her knuckles turning white as the sheer, raw power of the experimental engine vibrated through her spine. She looked over at Garrett. The contrast between them was absolute. Helena possessed wealth, power, and a global reputation. Yet her chest was tight with an agonizing panic. She had everything the world could offer, except peace. Garrett, wearing a simple gray shirt with grease on his sleeves, looked as though he were sitting on a porch watching a sunset. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, his movements incredibly fluid and precise, navigating the heavy crosswinds of the desert highway with a quiet, masculine grace that defied the speed of the machine. He gave off an undeniable aura of absolute safety without even trying. Suddenly, a sharp, rhythmic chiming sound echoed through the cockpit. The central dashboard screen flashed a warning yellow. The internal vacuum line pressure gauge began to climb dangerously, moving from 80% to 95%. The automated safety systems were fighting back against the speed, preparing to trigger another total vehicle lockdown. "Garrett," Helena said, her voice rising in a rare moment of pure, unbridled panic as she leaned toward the screen. "The pressure is spiking again. It's going to lock up. We aren't going to make it." "The automatic valves are blind," Garrett said, his voice entirely steady as he shifted his weight, his eyes locked firmly on the distant ribbons of asphalt approaching the Henderson city limits. "We have to bleed the pressure manually, but the mechanical release toggle is located under the passenger side dashboard, right beneath your feet. I need you to reach down and pull it, Helena." Helena froze, her breath catching. I don't know anything about machinery, Garrett." "What if I pull the wrong line? What if I ruin the core?" Garrett briefly took his right hand off the steering wheel and placed it firmly over her trembling fingers. His hand was warm, rough from years of manual labor, and completely steady. The simple touch sent a wave of grounding calmness through her entire body. "You won't ruin it," Garrett said softly, his eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second. "I am right here with you. Reach down, find the silver T-handle against the firewall, and pull it back when I tell you to. Trust my voice." Helena swallowed hard, nodding once. She dropped down into the footwell of the hypercar, her expensive ivory suit pressing against the floorboards as her fingers searched through the dark wires beneath the dashboard. Her hand brushed against a cold, solid piece of metal. "I have it," she called out, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. "Hold it steady," Garrett commanded, his eyes focusing on a steep uphill grade just ahead on the highway. "The pressure is hitting 99%. The moment we crest this hill, the engine will strain. When I say pull, you pull with everything you have. Ready, now." Helena Sterling pulled the silver T-handle with every ounce of strength in her body. A sharp, violent hiss echoed beneath the chassis as a massive cloud of superheated white vacuum vapor erupted from the side vents of the hypercar, painting a brief, dramatic trail against the desert asphalt. Inside the cabin, the digital pressure gauge plummeted instantly from 99% back into the safe, emerald-tinted zone of 40%. The terrifying, deafening alarm fell dead. The Apex Stratos did not scream. Instead, its experimental power plant settled into a deep, predatory hum that vibrated directly through the soles of Helena's leather shoes. Garrett Vance did not waste a single heartbeat. His large, steady hands moved with effortless, fluid precision, shifting the steering wheel just 3 degrees to catch the heavy crosswind as they crested the desert hill and blasted onto the final, sweeping descent toward the glittering glass towers of the Henderson corporate district. The digital speed readout stabilized at a breathtaking speed, swallowing the remaining miles of asphalt in a matter of minutes. The chase convoy, led by the heavy armored SUV carrying Maeve, tore through the rear security gates of the Aegis Exhibition Center with exactly 2 minutes and 14 seconds left on the global countdown clock. Inside the main auditorium, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Over 2,000 international venture capitalists, tech moguls, and media representatives sat in tiered velvet seating, their murmurs creating a low, anxious buzz that filled the cavernous room. Above the massive circular rotating stage, a colossal LED screen ticked down the final seconds. 042, 041, 040. At the edge of the stage, standing behind a sleek titanium podium, Preston Caldwell adjusted his gold cufflinks. A cold, victorious smile played at the corners of his mouth. He looked out at the front row of Japanese and British investors, then glanced at his watch. He knew the transport flatbed was trapped on the interstate. He knew the car wasn't coming. He cleared his throat, leaning into the microphone, ready to deliver the corporate execution he had planned for months. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Preston Caldwell's voice boomed across the auditorium, filled with a manufactured, aristocratic solemnity. We at Sterling Dynamics pride ourselves on absolute precision. However, true leadership requires acknowledging when a vision has outpaced its current management. Due to an unfortunate and catastrophic technical failure under the current executive office, the Apex Stratos will not be appearing on this stage tonight. Tomorrow morning, the board of directors will convene to initiate an emergency leadership restructuring. Before the word restructuring could fully leave his lips, a deep, tectonic vibration shook the entire concrete foundation of the exhibition center. It wasn't a sound at first, it was a physical force that rattled the glass champagne flutes in the VIP gallery. The massive, reinforced acoustic hangar doors at the rear of the stage did not slowly slide open. They were violently overridden, bursting apart as the matte black silhouette of the Apex Stratos exploded onto the rotating platform. Garrett Vance handled the multi-million-dollar machine with the aggressive, calculated mastery of a combat pilot, drifting the rear tires across the polished white stage structure and snapping the vehicle to a flawless, dead stop directly beneath the blinding white spotlights. The crowd went absolutely electric. 2,000 people leaped to their feet in a deafening wave of applause, thinking the dramatic, smoke-filled entrance was a meticulously choreographed piece of corporate theater. Flashbulbs blinded the stage in a synchronized stutter of white light. Julian Thorne rushed out from the backstage wing, his face flushed with a mixture of immense relief and immediate toxic opportunism. He didn't look at the car's condition, he only saw the global cameras. He hurried to the driver's side door, violently pulling the butterfly panel upward. "Get out of the asset immediately." Julian hissed under his breath, his eyes darting anxiously toward the media pit as he reached down to grab Garrett's arm. "Go, wait by the loading docks with the security guards. Your little roadside assistance job is over. Helena, get out of the passenger side and stand by the front wing. Smile for the Tokyo feed. Julian, step into the frame." Garrett Vance did not move. He unbuckled his safety harness with a slow, deliberate click, his calm brown eyes looking up at Julian with a quiet, freezing intensity that made the executive's hand instantly drop from his sleeve. From the passenger side, Helena Sterling stepped out into the bright spotlights. The global tech investors gasped softly. The pristine, untouchable CEO of Sterling Dynamics was not wearing her flawless, media-trained appearance. The right knee of her expensive ivory pantsuit was covered in dark, greasy smudge marks from where she had knelt on the floorboards to pull the manual pressure valve. Her dark hair had loosened from its tight bun, and a streak of carbon dust was faintly smeared across her high cheekbone. But as she stood under the lights, her green eyes weren't filled with panic anymore. They were filled with a fierce, burning authority that the board members had never seen before. Preston Caldwell stepped away from the podium, his face turning an uncomfortably dark shade of purple as he stared at the perfectly running hypercar. "Helena," he stammered, trying to recover his composure into the live microphone. It seems your technical team managed a last-minute recovery. A fortunate stroke of luck for your grandfather's company." "It wasn't luck, Preston." Helena's voice rang through the auditorium, clear, resonant, and entirely stripped of her usual corporate diplomacy. She walked around the front splitter of the car, stopping directly beside Garrett as he stepped out of the cabin in his worn gray shirt and oil-stained boots. "And it wasn't my corporate technical team." Julian Thorne stepped into the light, intercepting a roaming cameraman and forcing a wide, artificial smile. "What the chief executive means to say," Julian interrupted quickly, his voice loud and patronizing as he tried to block Garrett from the lens, "is that our internal engineering protocols functioned flawlessly. This local worker merely assisted our senior director with basic tool containment during an unexpected atmospheric pressure variation. We thank him for his manual labor, and he has been fully compensated with a standard roadside fee." A low murmur of disappointment rippled through the front rows of the crowd. The arrogant, wealthy executives were doing what they always did, taking the credit, minimizing the working man, and hiding the truth behind a wall of expensive public relations. Suddenly, Barrett Hayes pushed his way past the backstage security barriers, sprinting onto the main stage with his diagnostic laptop still clutched under his arm. He didn't care about corporate protocol. He didn't care about his salary or Julian's threats. He marched directly to the central presentation microphone, his hands shaking with an overwhelming, reverent adrenaline. "That is a lie." Barrett's voice echoed through the massive speakers, shocking the entire auditorium into absolute silence. The young engineer pointed a trembling finger at Garrett Vance. "Our internal protocols didn't save this car. Our internal protocols completely destroyed it. We were entirely blind." This man didn't just assist with tools. He is the only reason the Apex Stratos is breathing right now. Preston Caldwell glared at the young technician. "Someone remove this boy from the stage," he ordered sharply. "He is hysterical." "No, he isn't," Barrett shouted, his voice cracking with pure emotion as he looked out at the front row of international tech moguls. "Look at his hands. Look at the bypass token in his pocket." You investors from Tokyo and London know exactly who designed the suborbital stabilization drives for the Omnitech aerospace platform 6 years ago. You know the signature Omega 9 Alpha. This isn't a local mechanic. This is Garrett Vance. The name landed in the high-end auditorium like a devastating artillery shell. In the front row, an elderly Japanese billionaire, the primary venture partner for the entire European market, suddenly stood up from his seat, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief. He looked from Barrett's laptop screen to the tall, quiet man standing in the center of the stage in a gray t-shirt. "Vance?" The billionaire whispered into his personal translator headset, his voice carrying an unmistakable weight of profound respect. "The legendary propulsion architect who vanished after the Seattle defense trials? The man who wrote the foundational mathematics for low-voltage signal integrity? Him?" The entire auditorium erupted into a chaotic, deafening roar of whispers. The media cameras swung away from Helena, away from Preston Caldwell, and locked their lenses entirely onto the humble single father, who stood under the blinding lights with his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his dark work pants, completely unbothered by the sudden shock of the world discovering his hidden identity. The whispers in the cavernous auditorium swelled into a physical wave of sound, a chaotic murmur of shock and recognition that rippled through the rows of international executives. The flashing lights of 100 media cameras shifted away from the polished corporate logos and locked entirely onto Garrett Vance. The humble mechanic stood completely still under the blinding white spotlights, his broad shoulders squared, his calm expression entirely unchanged by the sudden eruption of his past. Takashi Morita, the venerable Japanese billionaire whose venture capital firm controlled the primary distribution networks across Europe and Asia, stepped past his personal security detail. He did not wait for an introduction. He walked directly up the stage stairs, his tailored silk suit catching the light, his eyes fixed on Garrett with an expression of profound, uncharacteristic reverence. The entire auditorium held its breath as the powerful industrialist stopped 2 feet away from the man in the grease-stained t-shirt. Mr. Morita did not offer a casual corporate handshake. Instead, he bowed his head in a deep traditional sign of absolute respect. For 6 years, the global aerospace community has chased the ghost of the Omega 9 architecture, Mr. Morita said, his voice carrying clearly through the stage microphones, resonating into the absolute silence of the room. "We were told the engineer who designed the suborbital stabilization drives had retired permanently. To find you here, in the Nevada desert, saving a project that our finest laboratories declared dead. It is an honor I did not expect tonight, Mr. Vance." Julian Thorne's face completely drained of color, turning a hollow, ghostly shade of gray. His hands trembled so violently that he nearly dropped his custom smartphone onto the polished white platform. He took a desperate, stumbling step forward, his voice cracking into a high, panicked pitch as he tried to claw back his shattered authority in front of the global media. "Mr. Morita, please, there has been a massive administrative misunderstanding," Julian stammered, forcing a grotesque, sweating smile as he gestured toward the hypercar. "This man, he merely performed basic roadside assistance under my direct supervision. The proprietary technology belongs entirely to Sterling Dynamics. Our marketing parameters clearly state—" "Julian, shut your mouth," Helena Sterling interrupted. Her voice didn't just cut through Julian's desperate rambling, it shattered it completely. Helena stepped forward, her green eyes flashing with a fierce, cold anger that brought an immediate, suffocating stillness to the stage. She didn't look at the cameras, and she didn't look at the board of directors. She looked directly at Julian, her posture radiating a raw, unyielding sovereignty that her grandfather would have instantly recognized. "You will not utter another syllable on this stage, Julian," Helena said, her voice dropping to a deadly, resonant calm. You did not supervise this recovery. You panicked. You insulted this man, you insulted his daughter, and you attempted to steal the credit for a miracle you didn't have the courage or the intelligence to understand. You are relieved of your duties at Sterling Dynamics, effective immediately. Security. Remove him from my sight. 2 heavy-set security guards marched onto the platform, grabbing Julian by his arms. The arrogant executive didn't fight back. He looked completely broken, his expensive charcoal suit wrinkling as he was silently escorted off the stage into the dark wings of the auditorium. Preston Caldwell stood near the titanium podium, his jaw tight, his fingers gripping the edges of the metal so hard his knuckles turned white. He saw the way the international investors were looking at Helena. He saw the respect in Mr. Morita's eyes. The corporate trap he had spent months building to destroy her had completely dissolved. To save his own position on the board, Preston quickly stepped forward, clapping his hands with a manufactured, opportunistic warmth. "A brilliant executive decision, Helena," Preston declared into the remaining microphone, trying to pivot the narrative. "We at the board completely echo your sentiment. True genius must always be recognized. Sterling Dynamics will gladly write Mr. Vance a consulting check for $100,000 for his exceptional assistance tonight." Garrett Vance finally spoke. He didn't raise his voice, but the quiet, rugged masculinity of his tone instantly silenced Preston's corporate maneuvering. "Keep your money, Mr. Caldwell," Garrett said calmly, looking the wealthy board member directly in the eyes. "I didn't drive this car here for your board, and I didn't do it for your stock price. I did it because a promise was made to a child." Before Preston could process the blunt rejection, the heavy, soundproof acoustic doors at the side of the stage clicked open. Maeve Vance walked out onto the massive, brightly lit platform. She looked impossibly small beneath the towering LED screens and the blinding matrix of theatrical lights. She was still wearing her simple pink sneakers and clutching Barnaby the bear tightly against her chest, her wide brown eyes blinking in confusion at the 2,000 people staring down at her from the tiered seating. She didn't care about the global broadcast. She didn't care about the $12 million hypercar or the billionaires standing in suits. She only saw one thing. "Daddy!" Maeve cried out, her small voice echoing sweetly through the massive auditorium. Garrett didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He completely turned his back on the media cameras, turned his back on Mr. Morita, and dropped heavily to one knee on the polished white stage floor. He threw his arms wide open, his face breaking into the first genuine, radiant smile anyone had seen from him all afternoon. Maeve sprinted across the platform, her small sneakers squeaking against the pristine finish, and threw herself entirely into his embrace. Garrett caught her effortlessly, lifting her up against his broad chest as she buried her face into the collar of his gray shirt. He wrapped his large, protective arms around her, kissing the top of her soft brown curls while she squeezed Barnaby between them. The entire auditorium went absolutely dead silent. The contrast was breathtaking. In the center of a high-tech, multi-billion-dollar corporate spectacle defined by cold steel, expensive suits, and ruthless ambition, stood a single father holding his daughter, providing a fortress of absolute warmth and emotional security that no amount of money in that room could ever buy. Helena Sterling watched the embrace, and somewhere deep behind her tailored ivory jacket, the final, stubborn pieces of her emotional armor completely shattered. A rare, genuine warmth filled her chest, and her breath hitched in her throat as a single tear escaped her green eyes, tracking a clean line through the faint carbon dust on her cheek. She had spent her entire life running a ruthless race, believing that power and control were the only things that could keep her safe from the whispers of the world. Yet, looking at Garrett and Maeve, she realized she had been entirely poor inside. She had everything the corporate world could offer, except the profound, uncomplicated peace that this man gave to his child without even trying. Helena walked over to them slowly. She didn't care that the global live stream was capturing her every movement. She lowered herself completely onto her knees, ignoring the grease smudges on her white trousers, placing herself at eye level with the little girl. "Maeve," Helena said softly, her voice rich with a rare, vulnerable tenderness that none of her employees had ever heard before. "Your daddy didn't just fix my car tonight. He saved the most important day of my life. You were exactly right. He is the strongest, best driver in the entire world." Maeve pulled her face away from Garrett's shoulder, blinking at Helena. A small, innocent smile spread across her face, and she extended her hand, gently offering Barnaby the bear toward the wealthy CEO. "You can hold Barnaby if your belly still hurts from worrying," Maeve whispered. He's really good at sharing his brave. Helena let out a soft, emotional laugh, her trembling fingers gently touching the patched ear of the old teddy bear. She looked up from the child and met Garrett's steady brown eyes. The silent eye contact between them lasted for 3 long seconds, carrying a heavy, unspoken emotional chemistry that was deeper than any words could express, a mutual recognition of respect, strength, and a quiet safety that had finally found its anchor. The applause within the Aegis Exhibition Center slowly receded, replaced by an intense, expectant silence as the global tech community waited for the dust to settle on the stage. Preston Caldwell stood frozen, his hand still hovering over the silver microphone. He looked at Takashi Morita, then at Helena Sterling, and finally at Garrett Vance, who was now standing up, holding his daughter securely against his hip. Preston could feel the corporate ground liquefying beneath his feet. He swallowed hard, trying to inject an air of unbothered executive authority into his voice. "This is certainly an unprecedented piece of history," Preston said, attempting a patronizing chuckle that fell entirely flat in the massive room. Sterling Dynamics is always proud to cross paths with former industry giants. However, as chairman of the governance committee, I must remind our honored guests that structural appointments and consulting parameters must be fully vetted by the board. Mr. Vance has been out of the aerospace sector for 6 years. The technical compliance protocols for a global commercial rollout. Mr. Morita raised a single manicured hand, cutting Preston off in mid-sentence with an icy efficiency that made the entire front row of investors sit up straighter. "My investment fund has positioned $4 billion for the international deployment of the Stratos architecture," Mr. Morita stated, his voice flat, calm, and utterly absolute. "That capital was committed to the vision of Helena's grandfather, not to a committee of short-sighted financiers. Let me be entirely transparent with the board members sitting in this auditorium tonight. My funding is contingent upon 2 non-negotiable conditions." The room went so quiet that the faint, rhythmic ticking of the hypercar's cooling fans was the only sound left. "First, Mr. Morita continued, looking directly at Preston Caldwell, "Helena Sterling will immediately receive absolute, unvocalized voting control over the Sterling Dynamics Board of Directors, rendering all hostile restructuring motions permanently void. Second, the entire global production fleet will not move a single centimeter unless Garrett Vance is signed as the chief sovereign technical arbiter of the program, with absolute veto power over every mechanical and software architecture decision." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. It was a complete public execution of Preston Caldwell's corporate ambitions. The trap had not just failed, it had reversed and snapped shut on its architect. Preston's face shifted from purple to a hollow, broken white. He looked at the other board members in the front row, but they were already turning their backs to him, desperately typing on their tablets to distance themselves from his failure. Realizing his leverage was entirely gone, Preston lowered his head, silently stepping away from the podium and walking off the stage into the shadows, completely stripped of his power in front of the very market he had tried to impress. Helena turned to Garrett, her green eyes shining with an immense, quiet triumph. "The position is yours, Garrett. You will have a global budget, an elite team of thousands of engineers, and the absolute authority to build the future exactly how you see fit." Garrett looked down at Maeve, who was contentedly resting her chin on his shoulder, her tiny fingers still playing with Barnaby the bear's ears. Then he looked back at Helena. The vast wealth, the global prestige, the endless corporate towers, none of it moved the needle in his chest. "I gave up that world 6 years ago, Helena," Garrett said softly, his voice steady and grounded. "I didn't do it because I lost my passion for engineering. I did it because my daughter needs a father who is home for dinner, not a man who lives out of a first-class suitcase flying between Tokyo and London. My shop in Henderson is where she feels safe. I won't trade her peace for a corporate title." A few investors in the front rows shook their heads in disbelief, unable to comprehend a man turning down a multi-million-dollar global position just to stay in a dusty desert town. But Helena didn't look disappointed. In fact, a soft, incredibly beautiful smile touched her lips, the smile of a woman who had finally learned the difference between superficial power and real, unyielding strength. "I knew you would say that, Garrett," Helena whispered, her voice rich with an emotional warmth that belonged entirely to him, not the cameras. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound document, handing it to him. "Which is why I didn't write a standard corporate contract. The Vance Prototyping Initiative. Sterling Dynamics had already finalized the acquisition of the 5 acres of empty desert lot directly adjacent to Vance Mechanical Systems in Henderson. Absolute local autonomy. The company would construct a state-of-the-art, low-profile experimental laboratory right next to his old garage. Family-first parameters. Garrett would never be required to travel. The elite engineering teams from around the world would come to him, operating strictly under his hours, ensuring he would always be there when Maeve left for school and when she came home. "Your garage stays exactly the way it is," Helena said, her eyes locked onto his with an undeniable growing intensity. "You can still fix the neighborhood pickup trucks and the teacher's sedans, but you will also show the world how to build things that last. You don't have to leave your home, Garrett. We brought the world to you." Garrett looked down at the document, then at Helena, seeing the profound depth of her respect and the genuine transformation of her spirit. He nodded once, a slow, meaningful gesture of acceptance. The auditorium erupted into a final, thunderous standing ovation that shook the walls. 3 weeks later, the afternoon sun pressed down on the outskirts of Henderson, Nevada, with the same dry heat, but the air around Vance Mechanical Systems felt entirely different. The old concrete lot had been neatly swept, and the faded, hand-painted sign above the door had been beautifully restored by hand, its letters clean and sharp against the sun-bleached wood. In the corner of the office, Maeve's small painted desk had been upgraded with a beautiful new brass desk lamp and a shelf filled with bright, colorful books about astronomy and mechanics. Barnaby the bear sat proudly at the top of the shelf, guarding her colored pencils. The heavy roll-up door was fully raised, letting in the warm desert breeze. Garrett Vance stood by his primary workbench, his broad shoulders relaxed as he carefully adjusted the fuel lines on an old vintage sedan belonging to the local retired schoolteacher. A quiet, familiar hum echoed from the highway. A single, elegant, midnight blue sedan pulled into the gravel lot, stopping gracefully near the entrance. The door opened, and Helena Sterling stepped out into the desert sun. She wasn't wearing her stiff, intimidating ivory corporate suit today. She wore a simple, casual green linen dress, her dark hair falling loose and soft over her shoulders in natural waves. Her green eyes were bright, completely free of the suffocating stress and defensive posture that had governed her life for the last 2 years. She looked completely at peace. "Daddy!" Maeve squealed, dropping her crayon and sprinting out of the office door. "The CEO lady who knows how to apologize is here!" Helena laughed, a sound that was light, genuine, and entirely unpracticed. She knelt down on the gravel, completely unbothered by the dust, and caught Maeve in a warm, familiar hug as the little girl crashed into her. "I brought the cookies I promised, sweetheart," Helena murmured, handing Maeve a small bakery box before straightening up and walking into the shaded garage. Garrett set his wrench down on the magnetic tray, wiping his hands on his clean white rag. He looked at her, his rugged features softening into a warm, quiet smile that was reserved entirely for her. The engineers from the Berlin division just sent over the initial thermal array models for the new chassis, Garrett said, his deep voice carrying a playful, gentle edge. "They're still overcomplicating the low-voltage lines. I told them they need to stop thinking like billionaires and start thinking like mechanics." "They'll learn," Helena said, stepping closer to him until she was standing just a foot away, the ambient scent of clean machine oil and desert sage swirling between them. She looked up at his strong jaw, her eyes reflecting an emotional security she had searched for her entire life but had only found here, in a modest workshop on the edge of the desert. "They have the best teacher in the world." She reached out, her hand gently resting against his forearm, her fingers warming against his skin. Garrett didn't pull away. Instead, his large, steady hand turned, his fingers softly folding over hers, closing the distance between them in a quiet, unspoken promise of a shared future. Outside, the desert wind moved softly through the chain-link fence, carrying the distant, infinite horizon away into the evening light. Some of the finest, most powerful souls in the world do not live under the bright, artificial lights of global stages. They are found in the quiet, unmapped corners of the earth, working with their hands, fiercely protecting the children they love, and waiting patiently for the moment the world finally has no choice but to look up and see them clearly.